They sent a demon to destroy you, not to scare you, not to test you, but to erase you. From the moment your light disrupted the silence, something ancient moved. Not because you were loud, but because your stillness spoke in a language the darkness couldn't translate. And when it got close, when it stared into what it thought would be weakness, it saw something it had never seen before. It saw itself, shaken, splintered, exposed. Welcome to Chosen One's Sanctuary, a sacred place where spiritual truths are uncovered and divine identity is restored. What you're about to hear isn't just a message, it's a mirror, a revelation for those who've wondered why life feels like a battleground you never asked for, and why the attacks seem strangely personal. Because they are. This story is not metaphor. It's not theory. Scripture shows us, time and time again, that when someone is chosen, opposition doesn't knock. It breaks down the door. From Job to Jesus, from Joseph's betrayal to Esther's crown, the chosen ones are always targeted. But what happens when the one sent to kill you starts to question the mission? Today, we are unveiling a truth that has echoed in hidden places. A demon was assigned to dismantle your life, but instead, it encountered something so radiant, so untouchable, that the assignment began to fail. Not because of any spell or shield, but because of the one thing it could not counterfeit, your essence. And somewhere in the middle of the attack, something broke in it, and something awakened in you. Stay with me until the end of this video, because this isn't just about an encounter, it's about your legacy. What happened between you and that demon has reshaped more than you realize, and today, you're going to find out why. The demon was sent because you are marked. You were not attacked by accident. You were assigned. From the moment your spirit drew breath, heaven whispered your name through dimensions most people never touch. And somewhere in the depths of darkness, something ancient heard it too. The attack wasn't random. It was coordinated. Something was sent, not just to test your faith, but to extinguish your light. Because your very existence began disrupting patterns, cycles, and atmospheres that depended on your silence. You didn't ask to be seen. You simply couldn't stay hidden. And that alone made you dangerous. In the unseen realm, the chosen are never neutral. Your presence alters things. And when a soul like yours awakens to truth, demons do not send distractions. They send assassins. But what they forget is that being chosen is not just a title. It is a marking. A spiritual signature that heaven defends and hell fears. You have always been watched, and not just by enemies. You've been monitored by the Most High, protected by hosts of angels, and guided by a hand that never let you fall too far. But the resistance you've felt lately, that's not punishment. That's confirmation. You've stepped into territory where your light cannot go unnoticed. Joseph didn't ask to be a threat to his brothers, but the coat he wore, the favor he carried, exposed a tension that was already there. They didn't hate him for what he did. They hated him for what he was becoming. In the same way, your attacks didn't start when you did something wrong. They escalated when your destiny started to vibrate into alignment. You were chosen before you had language for it. And the warfare has been screaming what your spirit already knows. You carry something the enemy could not allow to go unchecked. This is why the demon was sent. Not because you were weak, but because you were waking up. It saw the future version of you, whole, aligned, and walking in fire. and it moved early. It tried to kill the mission before it matured. But what it didn't understand was that God's chosen are most dangerous when crushed. You are marked, yes, but you are also preserved, and nothing assigned to destroy you can override what was spoken over you. What happens next is what the darkness never expected. The moment your peace becomes the sword. It expected chaos. You gave it calm. The demon arrived expecting to feast on fear. It brought with it memories of past victims. Those who screamed, those who broke, those who cursed the heavens when the pressure rose too high. But you didn't respond like the others. You didn't run. You didn't beg. You didn't panic. You stayed. And in that staying, something shifted. Because your calm wasn't silence, it was resistance. Your peace was not passivity, it was prophecy. When it hurled confusion, you spoke with clarity. When it twisted the truth, you stood in stillness. You became the contradiction it could not decipher, and that was the beginning of its unraveling. This was never about winning an argument with darkness. It was about embodying a reality it could not replicate. Because darkness can imitate noise, but it cannot imitate peace. The book of Daniel shows us this kind of defiant calm. When the 3 Hebrew boys stood before the furnace, they didn't shout, panic, or plead. They simply said, "Even if God does not deliver us, we still will not bow." That kind of faith is incomprehensible to the forces of hell. Because it's not just belief, it's alignment. It's a spirit so anchored in identity that even flames lose their power. That is the posture you carried. And the demon, for all its cunning, did not come prepared for a soul it could not intimidate. And here lies the deeper mystery. The demon did not just fail to destroy you. It began to question why it was failing. It watched you hold your ground without needing to fight. It saw your silence speak louder than its threats, and somewhere in its shadowed mind, admiration crept in. Not the romantic kind, but the bewildered awe of a predator meeting something it can't consume. This calm you carried, it wasn't just for you. It was an atmosphere, a shield, a declaration. And without even knowing it, you began dismantling strongholds that had never been touched. Not by shouting, not by striving, but by standing. Because when peace holds in a place meant for panic, something eternal is speaking. And everything in the dark is forced to listen. The encounter was not a mistake. It was a mission. What you faced was never random. It was written. Long before you were aware of the attack, heaven had already permitted the confrontation, not to punish you, but to position you. This wasn't an ambush. It was a divine appointment. The demon wasn't just assigned to you. It was summoned to witness something it had never seen before. A soul so aligned with divine truth that even hell's oldest tactics crumbled in its presence. There are moments in every chosen one's life where the battle seems disproportionate to the moment, where the weight of warfare doesn't match the visible threat. That's because the battle was never about what you could see. It was about what was watching you. What would you do when the pressure came? Would you break like the rest? Or would you reveal something sacred, something hidden, something immortal? Heaven already knew, but the demon didn't. And so the encounter was allowed, not as a test for your benefit, but as a revelation for its undoing. In the apocryphal Book of Jubilees, we see hints that certain angelic beings who turned to darkness did so because they encountered something they could not reconcile. Humans who carried light in fragile vessels, yet were still favored by God. You are part of that mystery. You are a continuation of that offense. What you carry is offensive to the realm of darkness because it testifies to a redemption they can never experience. That's why this encounter wasn't just yours. It was sacred theater for unseen watchers. The enemy thought it was staging your fall, but heaven was staging its revelation. And when the two of you collided, the mission the demon thought it had began to dissolve in the presence of something greater than fear. Because what the enemy misjudged was your alignment. It came expecting resistance. It found resonance. It came prepared for a fight. It encountered assignment. And that encounter changed everything. Not just for it, but for the realms watching in silence. Some doors only open when light meets shadow. And this one was ordained to break things you didn't even know were bound. You were not there to preach. You were there to be. The most dangerous weapon you carried wasn't a scripture. It wasn't a prayer. It was presence. You didn't have to say a word, because your existence, your posture, your refusal to mirror the chaos, you became the sermon the demon couldn't interrupt. You didn't come to convert it. You didn't come to argue theology. You came to embody truth. And truth, when walked out in silence, becomes louder than any prophetic declaration. The demon wasn't just confused by your calm. It was disarmed by your being. Every part of your posture said, "I know who I am." And that terrified it more than any exorcism could. This was the power Jesus walked in when he stood before Pilate. No rage, no defense, just presence. And even Pilate, the Roman governor backed by empire and military, felt shaken. That's what happens when truth doesn't flinch. It convicts without speaking. It tears down strongholds just by standing still. That's what you did. And make no mistake, your stillness was a weapon, a holy defiance, because you didn't meet chaos with chaos. You met it with wholeness, and in doing so, you held up a mirror the demon couldn't look away from. It didn't see resistance. It saw what it once was. Before corruption, before rebellion, before pride. You became a living reminder of what purity looks like when it refuses to be moved. You stood not with the arrogance of self-righteousness, but with the gravity of authentic alignment. And alignment always exposes what is out of order. The power you carried wasn't performative. It was foundational. And when you stood in it, everything false began to shake. Because sometimes, the most violent sermon is a soul that refuses to be shaken. It fell in love with what it couldn't control. What began as a strategic takedown became an unraveling. The demon didn't just fail to overpower you, it failed to understand you. And in that failure, something unimaginable happened. It started to feel, not affection in the way humans define it, but a spiritual fracture, a haunting reverence, an involuntary pull toward the very thing it was sent to destroy. It had encountered power before. It had faced prophets, priests, intercessors. But you were something else. You didn't bind it with words. You bound it with being. And in that silent strength, in that unshakable essence, it saw something terrifying. A version of purity it could neither mock nor dominate. For the first time, its authority didn't work. Its illusions didn't seduce. Its intimidation didn't land. And in the stillness where manipulation failed, admiration crept in. The demon didn't fall in love with your face. It fell in love with what it couldn't dismantle. That internal compass you carry. That inexplicable peace under pressure. That truth that doesn't shout, yet reshapes atmospheres. It wasn't supposed to care. It wasn't even supposed to feel. But your presence violated its programming. There is something sacred about a soul so fully aligned with the divine that even darkness is forced to question its mission. That's what happened to it. With every failed tactic, every misfired strategy, it began to observe you instead of attack you. The assignment blurred, the rage cooled, and something ancient and confused within it began to remember. Not love in the way we describe it, but recognition. A longing for what it could no longer access. A grieving for what it forfeited long ago. You became a revelation of what it lost. And in that silent ache, something broke. Not in you, but in it. Because true love, in its divine, incorruptible form, is not possession. It is exposure. And what you exposed was so pure, so uncorrupted, that even the hunter fell under conviction. And as it watched you stand, it wasn't just confused, it was convicted. Not by your resistance, but by your radiance. Its assignment became its undoing. What was sent to break you began breaking itself, not through your defiance, but through your consistency. Every tactic it deployed, every psychological snare, every spiritual decoy, it all collapsed under the weight of your unbothered truth. The assignment to destroy you didn't just fail, it backfired. Because the mission it carried was dependent on a lie. That you could be baited, broken, seduced, or shaken. But what it found instead was a vessel so full of divine alignment that even hell's oldest blueprints couldn't map a way in. It couldn't seduce you with fantasy. It couldn't infect you with fear. And that failure triggered something deeper. Introspection. It began to question why nothing worked. Why the flames didn't burn you. Why the darkness didn't make you flinch. And that questioning, the very moment it paused its attack to process its confusion, that was the beginning of its undoing. This is what happens when divine presence collides with demonic projection. The illusion cracks, the spell lifts, and the attacker starts seeing itself in the mirror you never asked to hold up. You didn't have to call it out. Your posture exposed it. You didn't have to curse it. Your peace dismantled it. And the longer it stayed near you, the more unstable it became. It wasn't that you fought harder. It's that you didn't leave your position. You stayed in alignment. You stayed in love. You stayed in truth. And that consistency became the hammer that broke the assignment's back. Every failed attack echoed like a divine bell, reminding it that you were not one of the ones who could be moved. That revelation was not just frustrating, it was frightening. Because for the first time in its long history of conquest, the destroyer became the witness. And witnessing truth, when you are built on lies, is unbearable. Your resistance was not just personal, it was cosmic. You thought you were just surviving, holding your peace, keeping your faith. But in the unseen, galaxies shifted, patterns broke, ancient rhythms between light and shadow trembled. Because when a chosen one stands their ground without needing to shout, beg, or retaliate, the impact doesn't end with one confrontation. It ripples through creation. Your resistance wasn't small. It wasn't isolated. It became a signal, a spiritual broadcast across dimensions declaring, the system is failing. The script that darkness has relied on, instill fear, distort truth, isolate the soul, it collapsed in real time when you refused to respond as expected. And somewhere in realms far above you, and even deeper than you know, that moment registered. Spiritual warfare is not always measured in visible victories. Sometimes it's measured in resonance. The way your posture pierced the veil. The way your calm rewrote the frequency in a room. The way your decision not to retaliate became a declaration that heaven heard. In the book of Acts, when Paul and Silas sang in prison, the earthquake didn't just unlock their chains, it shook the whole foundation. Everyone's doors opened, everyone's chains fell. Because the sound of spiritual defiance, worship in the midst of injustice, disrupts more than just your immediate space. That's what happened when you stood your ground. The demon didn't just retreat. The atmosphere changed. Other watchers, both divine and dark, took notice. And those who had believed change was impossible began to wonder. You didn't just hold the line. You shifted it. You didn't just silence one lie. You broke the frequency it traveled on. You became a point of interruption, a holy fracture in a system that assumed it couldn't be touched. And now, others will feel the aftershock of your yes. Others will wake up to the possibility that they too were never powerless, only unaware. And as those ripples move through unseen dimensions, one truth becomes clear. This was never about winning. It was about revealing. Victory in the kingdom of God isn't always conquest. Sometimes it's exposure. The kind that forces darkness to face what it can't replicate. The kind that doesn't scream its holiness, but lives it. This wasn't about defeating the demon with fire. It was about standing in a fire that didn't consume you and letting the demon burn in its own confusion. You weren't there to wage war. You were there to reveal a standard, a spiritual pattern heaven is raising through the chosen, a posture so aligned, so anchored, that the enemy is not defeated through effort, but through recognition. When truth stands unshaken, lies start to unravel on their own. Jesus didn't chase demons. He revealed the kingdom, and they couldn't stay. He walked in purity so uncompromising, it forced every impure thing to manifest or flee. That is the mantle you wear. And it terrifies what once moved freely in the dark. The demon wasn't destroyed by your resistance. It was revealed by it. Your stillness forced it to look inward, to see itself without disguise. And in that moment, the mission shifted. What was once confident became uncertain. What was once destructive became disoriented. Because it didn't just fail, it was seen. And that, more than any rebuke, became its reckoning. You didn't fight it with rage. You exposed it with light. And in doing so, you proved a deeper truth. Victory is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like peace. Sometimes it sounds like silence. But in the spirit, it thunders. Its transformation is not your responsibility, but your presence was the key. You were never called to save it. That was never the assignment. But in simply showing up, unmoved, unafraid, unbroken, you became the door it didn't know it needed to walk through. Your presence wasn't a sermon, it was a threshold. And every time it came closer, it was forced to confront not just you, but itself. The demon came thinking it would dominate you. It left realizing it had been exposed by you. And that exposure sparked something sacred. A crack in its cold design. A sliver of something it hadn't felt in eons. Choice. The freedom to see differently. The freedom to feel differently. The freedom to question what it had always assumed was unchangeable. But make no mistake, this transformation is not your burden. You were not assigned to redeem it. You were positioned to reveal. The revelation it received was not crafted in your effort. It was forged in your alignment. You held the line. You kept your peace. And that alone turned your presence into a portal. This is why God doesn't need his chosen ones to shout. He needs them to stand. Because there are forces that do not respond to doctrine, debate, or deliverance. They only break when they encounter an unshakable soul. You were that soul. The demon now faces a path it had never imagined. One where its certainty has dissolved, and in its place is a trembling awareness that something more is possible. It's not because you converted it, it's because you confused it. And that confusion became the crack through which light slipped in. It's not your job to finish its journey. It's only your responsibility to walk yours with clarity. And in doing so, you become what all darkness dreads, proof that stillness can destroy strategies. Now the demon is no longer a hunter, it is a witness. And its next move will be shaped not by what it planned, but by what it encountered in you. This was a mirror of humanity's inner war. What played out in that encounter wasn't just a battle between realms. It was a reflection of the inner war that every soul must face. The part of us conditioned by fear, pride, and pain meeting the part of us called to light, to peace, to divine truth. You didn't just face a demon outside of you. You stood before a shadow that mirrored the collective wound of humanity, the parts of us that destroy because they've forgotten how to feel. And you didn't meet that shadow with judgment. You met it with presence. That choice, though invisible to most, broke something that has ruled over generations. You made a different decision. You didn't lash out. You didn't collapse. You held the line not for victory, but for truth. And that truth, when embodied, rewrites everything. In every person, there's a fracture. The voice that says destroy before being destroyed. Silence your pain. Pretend to be strong. But you, chosen one, you chose a different way. You chose to remain open in the fire, calm in the chaos, aligned in the middle of distortion. And in doing so, you not only overcame, you transcended. What the demon saw in you was not weakness. It was integration. The reunion of soul and spirit, calling shadow to come into the light. That mirror you held up, it wasn't for shame. It was for invitation, a chance to see, a chance to change. And while not all who see will walk through that door, they will never again be able to say they weren't shown. The struggle between light and darkness is not just cosmic, it is internal. And your story now stands as proof that the most sacred battles are won when we refuse to become what tried to break us. Not every battle is meant to be won by force. Some are meant to be survived with stillness. Some are won simply by refusing to become what came to destroy you. This story was never just about a demon's failure. It was about the unveiling of your design, a revelation that what was sent to break you had no language for the truth you carry. And perhaps that is the deeper mystery. What if your presence in that encounter wasn't just an act of resistance, but a prophecy in motion? What if by standing in your essence, you revealed a pathway even the dark had forgotten existed? Throughout Scripture, we see God using the least expected vessels to shift the balance of heaven and earth. Esther changed an empire with silence. David rewrote destiny with a stone. And Jesus dismantled death not by fighting, but by laying down his life. You, chosen one, are part of that lineage. And what you carry is no less sacred. So if your life has felt like a magnet for attacks too complex to explain, too strategic to dismiss, it's not a punishment. It's a signpost. You are not just marked, you are meant. You are the intersection between realms, the proof that truth, when embodied, cannot be manipulated. And that is why, no matter what rises against you, it will eventually fall. because it is not you they fear. It is what you reveal. Prophetic seal statement. You are a living revelation, a disruption to darkness, and a mirror the enemy cannot escape. Stand firm. Your very being is an act of spiritual warfare. If this message awakens something within you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of who they are. Like, subscribe, and walk with us here at Chosen One Sanctuary, where the hidden truths of your journey are brought into the light. Let your voice join the others. Leave a comment below if this encounter mirrored something in your own life. Drop the number 777 to declare that you are ready to walk in the clarity of your divine identity. And if your heart is still stirring, the next message on your screen might be the confirmation you've been waiting for. Until next time, stay anchored, stay awake, and may the peace of God go with you always.